Welcome into Bitcoin Halving today. Of course, it's going to be, let's do that one again, eh? Welcome into Bitcoin Halving Day. Of course, it's going to be a good one. We'll break it down for you guys. We've got a lot of clips. I think you guys are going to like this show because it does give you some analysis on whether it's going to go up or whether it's going to go down. That's the big question for the day. It'll be fun. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsor, and that is Tangem. And if you want to get into self-custody, this is the way to do it. It's very simple as well. I think this is one of the easiest ways to get into self-custody that I've had when I let people know about this card, this wallet. They like it. I think they like the ease of use and also the security layer that Tangem represents. So super easy to use, and also works very uniquely with the app itself, and a lot of options within the Tangem wallet as well, including swaps, all sorts of stuff. All you have to do is hit that Get Tangem, and you get the 3-card set. Use our code, and that's going to help the channel out. Let's get into it today. And of course, the biggest issue and topic for the day, of course, is the Bitcoin halving. 6 hours remaining. This thing is accelerating too quite a bit. I think we continue to pick up. It's very possible we might see this maybe before 5 o'clock Eastern time. Here we're 2.5 hours away. I've seen it accelerate quite a bit. 39 blocks remaining. Current Bitcoin price holding at around 64 and some change. So a lot going in. So the question everybody's asking is, hey, Paul, do you think Bitcoin's going to go from here and we're going to see kind of this parabolic move, no retracement? Or is this the time where we see a little bit of pullback? We pulled together a montage for you guys to kind of look at both sides of the plate. Take a look.
Now, the last time I talked about the Bitcoin halving was all the way back in January, and this video hit over 2 million views. And the next generation of millionaires are definitely about to be made.
The Bitcoin halving is literally tomorrow, and a lot of people are gonna easily 10x their net worth in the next 6 to 12 months because of this.
This could very well be the last time that we see Bitcoin at its current price.
We could be seeing $150,000 plus Bitcoin.
So not only do we have a supply shock, but a demand shock. And when demand outpaces slower supply growth, price has to go up.
Now, everyone is all wound up that this is going to hurt the Bitcoin miners, and you're right, but that assumes the price of Bitcoin isn't going to go up or go up a lot.
We're about to turn a couple $100s into hundreds and thousands of dollars, guys.
I bet all of my time, all of my money, my entire life savings, and my family's safety on this one fact. We are about to experience the most lucrative asset appreciation in human existence.
Came down there, Israel attacks Iran, boom, 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 price tanks to 59, and bang, they all come in and start buying it. Who was buying it? Let me point this out to you. The likes of BlackRock.
Research BlackRock, the biggest hedge fund in this bitch.
All right, here's one option you can be doing. You can be doing absolutely nothing. You can just be watching the market. All right, the second thing that you could be doing right now, or you could be thinking about doing right now, is actually picking up some of these digital assets on the dip.
Number one, AVAX. It's my biggest crypto when it goes into gaming.
Here's 3 stocks with huge potential. First company is Riot. Second company is Coinbase.
But then we have the 2020 halving in May of 2021, which was right about here, and Bitcoin did go down a decent amount, but then it bounced right back in a span of just a few days.
Do not let these crypto gurus fool you guys. Bitcoin and crypto is not going to be at 100K and up 5x in the next month just because Bitcoin halves.
ขอต้อนรับทุกคนเข้าสู่ช่วง Bitcoin Halving Countdown
ไปในสถานะอะไร
ซึ่งก็ต้องแยก Bitcoin กับตัว
Bitcoin Halving
ऐसे slowly जब भी halving हुई है चार्ट
No crean todo lo que ven por ahí. No inviertan en FOMO.
Debería de sacar sus ganancias y salir corriendo.
The Bitcoin halving is about to happen on April the 20th, which means we need to talk about meme coins because they are going to come back with the Bitcoin halving.
What if, when the Bitcoin halving happens tomorrow, what if it's broken? Has anybody thought about that?
Okay, I think that the team here sometimes gets a little bit overzealous on their comedy chops. So anyway, so as you can see, nobody really agrees on this right now, where we're going to see Bitcoin going. I think if you take a look at just the tech and just kind of understand the markets, look at the impact, obviously, we're seeing from around the world in a lot of different ways. We'll get to more of a serious point, and that is how does this respond? You know, because it is an asset. It's a digital asset class that I think still has those principles that it has to abide to. If you look at some examples here, of course, price versus the hash rate, pretty much the trend is still online. Many people would look at, you know, this outside here of us potentially being down in this zone right here of where the potential for the halving could be. Now, again, all this simply means for those of you who are maybe brand new to crypto and don't really understand what's happening, it's just going to become twice as hard to mine a block. It's just that simple. So imagine any kind of work you're doing is twice as hard. That usually means your value of something is going to go up. The key here, though, is because it's twice as hard, there's less of it produced. So then you do have to deal with the supply shock and the demand shock that some of those people were talking about. Many people look at this as an opportunity because the ETFs, the institutional capital that plays into this. I still believe that is probably one of the bigger scenarios that does affect not only the halving, but also affects, I think, Bitcoin from a more macro standpoint as an asset that's going to grow over the next few years. I want to go to another clip here, and this is Arthur Hayes, who is giving a prediction on where he thinks it's going to go. Take a look.
A year end for 2024, plus also what you think the next all-time high will be.
Okay, my year-end price prediction is 99,999, and my my all-time high prediction is 900,009. Well, basically $1 less than 1 million Bitcoin.
I'll say 120K end of year, and I'll say 500. I'll be a little more conservative than Arthur by end of cycle.
End of cycle 500. That's a pretty aggressive number. So end of year, end of cycle. Love to get you guys' input. I believe we will see an uptrend. Now, does it get the immediate spin up from the halving time? I'm still looking at a little bit more bearish case of a short period of time where we'll see either a slight down or some sideways action. But we are getting some mixed signals in terms of sentiment, because sentiment has still been very up on our MSI, which is indicating that we could see an uptrend for Bitcoin. So a lot of people really trying to play this out. This was a clip that we did with Michael Saylor many years ago, and we thought we'd bring one back just to kind of get it, because this was in the last cycle of Bitcoin reaching its all-time high. Listen in. Could Bitcoin ever be replaced by some other crypto?
I think there's about zero chance of that. Bitcoin would be the most successful thing you've ever seen in your life. Period.
That's a big one. It could be controlled by some nation states or potentially just a handful of miners. What are your thoughts on that?
I think 10,000 companies or 10,000 projects have attempted to displace Bitcoin. I think they've all failed.
Yeah.
The only way you're going to be successful with another crypto asset network is if you target a totally different use case than base treasury asset. Then maybe it's logical. But right now the market is spoken, right? Yeah. And if you don't actually accept Bitcoin, then what do you think about Facebook, Google, Apple, and Amazon? Because those things are growing much slower with much weaker network effects right now.
Right. So, I mean, this was, as you can tell, because I had a little bit more hair. But the point is that Saylor and I were getting into, this was way before El Salvador adopted nation states. It was also way before we started to see the centralization of miners, which has actually happened. So there was a little bit of foresight in there in terms of where Bitcoin has come from. And this was prior to the last 69K high that we saw on Bitcoin. So I think there are some things that are pressuring it, though, and we'll show some of those to you today that will get into that. Bitcoin Magazine, of course, kind of put out a tweet right here that the ETF issuer Hashdex released their new Bitcoin halving commercial. So this point we're getting at here is that it has become mainstream. We're getting to the point where a lot of people are starting to recognize. However, it is not mainstream enough to where the average Joe completely understands what's happening out there in cryptocurrency, nor even in Bitcoin, other than the value. And Larry Fink goes on Squawk Box and talks about it from time to time. That, I think, has been pretty much the essence of what we've seen here recently. The thing that could really start to drive this, though, in terms of adoption, and also in terms of the potential from macro pressures, because right now what we've seen with, some scenarios playing out with not only the S&P, is that you're dealing with a couple of scenarios that could push more macro pressure on the dollar, because right now the dollar and gold both doing very well. BRICS news comes in right here. 40 nations now have applied to join BRICS in 2024. Remember, they had that, I think it was 6 nations that they allowed in last year, including Iran, Ethiopia, Argentina was in that list, handful of others. And I think this is just a continuance of, remember, global GDP is a big part of how the US dollar is set in as the reserve, monetary system. And this will be a big move going forward. Here, of course, is some out there that are looking at BlackRock using Bitcoin as an inflation hedge around US dollar worries. And a lot of this is still coming in on BRICS. So BlackRock recently opted to use Bitcoin as an inflation hedge. This, of course, is Larry Fink. He's talked about this many times. And he assures that now $9 trillion asset management firm perceives cryptocurrency concerning the dollar and its potential negative response to inflation figures. Now, you look at what Chair Powell did this last week, with these cautionary statements of we may not necessarily have a control on inflation. There's been many people out there that have stated that we are probably going to see maybe a new inflation standard, meaning we could never see the 2% again. There's a lot of analysts and also I think a lot of respected investors that have been around for quite some time that are looking at that number being somewhere in the range of 3 to 5% as kind of that sticky inflation. If that continues to hold, then yes, you're going to have not only companies like BlackRock, but nation states and a lot of other companies, including treasuries, looking for an alternative asset out there to go into. So I want to get into what Matt Hogan talked about, and it was really whether or not this was a buy or sell the news event. Listen in.
Is this a buy the rumor, sell the news situation, or is there something else to think about?
I think this is a buy the news event if you pan out long term. The price action around the halving, if you look out a week or 2 weeks, is relatively muted. But if you look out a year, the Bitcoin price has rallied substantially after each of the past 3 halvings, and I think it will do so again. I think you can overthink this. The amount of new supply of Bitcoin coming into the market is being cut in half. We're removing $11 billion of annual supply. I think big picture, that has to be good for price, and that's what I would expect over the next year.
So I'm wondering, Matt, a lot of people were already positioning for the next ETF, an ETH ETF, but the VanEck CEO recently said that he thinks that the application will be rejected. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we have a filing at the SEC right now for an Ethereum ETF, so I can't speak to that specific filing. But I think actually the bigger catalyst is still with Bitcoin itself. The biggest unlock is coming probably in Q3 and Q4 when the major wirehouses turn on access to Bitcoin. So we haven't really even got through the full totality of the Bitcoin ETF launch. I think we will get an Ethereum ETF eventually. I think it'll be, maybe later this year, maybe early next year, and that will be exciting as well. But there's a lot more to come on Bitcoin specifically. There's a lot of reasons to be excited about Bitcoin specifically before we move on to the next thing, which is Ethereum. Look, Bitcoin is going through both a demand shock from the launch of the ETF and a supply shock from this Bitcoin halving. Those are happening at the exact same time, and that's a really exciting setup for the next year ahead.
So Hogan, I think, is right, and the point I'm getting at is he is kind of anticipating maybe a little bit of softness and then a pretty much move up. And to the point he's talking about is this shock and demand all happening at the same time, which is a little bit unique versus what we've seen in the last cycles. So there are some variances on that. I'm a little bit in a disagreement with him on the ETF side. I don't think that May is going to be the date for an ETF for Ethereum, but I think it's going to happen sooner than later. And I think that too also has a lot to do with what's happening with Gensler right now and some of the positioning he's done. If you didn't check our Gensler video out, we kind of pasted together some very interesting analysis on whether Gensler was trying to maybe softly manipulate himself out of a position over at the SEC, which could change, a lot of the narrative around many of the cryptocurrencies, including Ethereum. New Bitcoin whales ETFs are up only 1.6. So this is basically a lot of people that have unrealized profits. So does that simply mean that we are at that point? This bottom has occurred. We're probably not going to see anything below the 60K. Or do we actually see that dip occur again, when you see these little narratives on global and macro pressure continuing to go in that direction? Investors on ETFs holders are barely up on unrealized profits, suggesting the cohort is likely not to produce much selling pressure in the short term. That's an important thing because obviously selling pressure, but I think a lot of selling pressure may come from people who are considerably up, and we've now obviously moved past, the tax issue. So we're not necessarily dealing with capital gains out that would be pressurized from like a end of year last. But I think now what we're dealing with is profitability. Some people might say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and take some off the table. So I don't know. There's a lot of things that really play into this, and the narratives are starting to pile up around it. All in overall, a very bullish position. When you look at this. Now, you still have the S&P, though, in a very negative trend just for the last week or so. And many people would look at that and say, well, this could be that dump that many people are concerned about. And that is one thing that could play into this. This was a Reuters analyst talking about whether or not this halving was priced in. Listen in.
So this will be the fourth halving. There's been 3. And it's important to remember that 95% roughly of all Bitcoin are already in existence. So we're talking about the future 5% that have yet to be mined, and the supply at which they're coming online is going to be cut in half. So this isn't going to have as big a price impact structurally as it has, the first couple of times around several years ago. However, it is going to impact the Bitcoin mining community.
So is that also in part why you don't expect to see the price spike as much with this halving?
Exactly. I mean, one of the big things that's important to remember with the halving is that this is pre-planned. So everybody knew that this was coming. This time around, I think in particular with the excitement around the spot ETFs, candidly, even the excitement around AI and all things kind of, innovation related, we saw an early, bid for Bitcoin. That's, been very powerful all year long. And I think now the markets in general, but Bitcoin markets in particular, are starting to contend with the reality that interest rates are going to be higher for longer. That is repricing risk. And I think that's part of the short-term weakness that we're seeing here in Bitcoin.
So as you can see, different opinions, people looking at different macro points to take a look at where things could play out from the miner side of things. The other thing from the miners, if you look at some of the historical outflow from miners in the past, and you can go back on to the second halving, the outflow happened really right before that. Let me kind of see if I can zoom in on that. So you can kind of see a big outflow right there. Then you further on in here in the third halving, it's a slight outflow right there that I'm kind of highlighting. And then, of course, the potential of what we're dealing with right now on the fourth halving. And the interesting thing is this is kind of ETF zone. So did the miners actually make their exit on, or if they were going to, prior to, the ETFs being, because obviously we saw the ETF see a huge impact on Bitcoin as a whole, and it's just been slowly moving against the macro pressures overall. So there's so many variables here on these, but I think the key here, and the one thing that is still a narrative that goes well beyond that of Bitcoin, is just look at the economies around the world, look at the macro pressure on the monetary system, look at the global scenario that we're dealing with on, everything that's happening in the Middle East, everything that's happening in some of these emerging nations that are starting to become a real power house, especially if you start to align them in BRICS. It gets a little different because it starts to paint out a scenario that we haven't seen before, especially with the dollar as the global reserve. So Kathy Wood says, well, wait a minute, maybe there's an opportunity here, and if there is some pain, this is what I'll do. Listen in.
We're taking advantage of controversy. I'll give you a good example. Coinbase, oh my gosh. Last year at this time, I believe the SEC served it with a Wells notice. Now, in my history, or in the business, anytime a financial firm gets served a Wells notice, run for the hills. But instead, we bought. And so we were looking very carefully at that, and we bought into it. That stock from its low to its recent high was up tenfold in 1 year. So we're willing to put up with short-term pain, no matter how controversial it is, if we believe a company is well-positioned and that it will begin, and investors will begin to reap rewards within the next 5 years. From $62,000 today, we believe, and we're leaning towards our bull case. Our base case is roughly $650,000. Our bull case is 1.5 million.
Well, there you go. So, she hasn't deviated from her bullishness, on Bitcoin in general. She continues to drive it as the key asset to look for in terms of, what we're dealing with, somewhat, I will call safe zone. When you look at some of the securities out there that have had some pretty troubled times, including things in stocks like Tesla. We've seen a handful of others that have really started to see these kind of pressures from market conditions. So it's not like these things won't turn around. Here's the COA-BC letter kind of talking about this. Global stocks now on track for their worst week since October 2023. And you also have a couple of indexes here which cover about 85% of the global equity markets, also down 2%. S&P down 5%. And then geopolitical tensions, we talked about, VIX is up. This is pretty typical. As long, and when you see VIX, meaning there's also some opportunities here of seeing the dollar continue to see a little bit of a lift, and also gold. So many factors here that play into this. And again, I think digital assets are still the winner here overall, whether you look at some of the some of the premium layer ones, whether it's Solana, Avalanche, or then you get into some of the altcoins that you really like in terms of the narratives. Or if you're just living in the ETH ecosystem and you think Ethereum is the game to play here. There's so many scenarios that are opportunities for the future of where digital assets are going. So a lot of good stuff, I think, overall. As geopolitical tensions have worsened, Bitcoin continues to see a little bit of a decline in inflows. This is talking about ETFs. 4-week rolling average decreased by $1 billion from their peak of $700 million. However, current inflows are still significantly higher than they were the last 2 years. So that in itself is still positive. Interestingly, while Bitcoin is a decentralized currency, it's being sold in times of geopolitical uncertainty. So that's an unusual point. And most of the demand appears to be rotated into gold and the US dollar. This is what we were talking about just a minute ago. So factors, as you can see, because remember, these are investors that do guide the market because of the size of the investment that they're making. And they can move, these whales can move markets. And if you get a market that starts to move negatively, you get into that fear factor. And that's when you get these massive spikes, just like we saw, here this morning with what was happening in the Middle East. You see a massive spike down and then a massive spike up. Those are the kind of narratives because of the sentiment that drives these decisions, which are very, very personal for a lot of people. Further within this is just some other things to kind of compare. This is the Solana footprint output, but what I want to look at here is the costs of doing things like a Bitcoin transaction. You can kind of see what the comparisons are here versus a Google search and all of that. The point is that the cost for Bitcoin transactions most likely are going to be going up. There are other factors that are playing into this, including factors around what's going to happen with runes. All of this is timing in a very unique way as well. So I think that not a lot of people are even aware of this, but I want to go to a clip by Casey who talks about runestones. And this, of course, is tied into Bitcoin. These are ordinals that eventually will, and I'll show you a chart here in a second to show you how ordinals have continued to trend up. So we will see, I think, fees on Bitcoin continue to rise. Here's a clip by Casey. Listen in.
And what do you think the implications are going to be?
I think fees are going to get really high. I think it's launching on the halving, so we'll probably see like 1,000 sat per VByte fees, which are like insane.
What's the timeline for this, Casey? So when is Runes going to be available for Jeremy Allaire to go get his USDC shitcoin?
I assume he'll be first in line. So yeah, Jeremy Allaire can start etching the USDC rune on April 19th, I think is the projected date.
then where do I go to like trade these things? What's kind of the ecosystem that you expect to develop?
Oh, it's not good, bro. It's not good.
Okay,
all right?
It's not good.
It's rough.
All right.
Xverse is one, and I think Magic Eden, I think, is another. And I think they're also gearing up to start doing runes as well.
Magic Eden is one, of course. It does all happen in a lot of interesting coordination with, of course, the halving. And I think this is the other factor, because many people will look at, well, as Bitcoin transactions go up, it becomes, a little bit more challenged overall. And I think a lot of people do look at that. And ordinals, whether you like them or don't, they have had an impact both, I think, positively on Bitcoin as a whole, because it has shown the opportunity for that. I want to go to another clip where he talks a little bit further about how, maybe this particular initiative would change Bitcoin. Listen in.
I think within a year, we'll either have a soft fork activated or a soft fork that's really going through the final stages of being activated. And I think that's maybe my favorite part about it, is that there's a lot of renewed interest in improving Bitcoin, the base layer, and it's looking like more realistic. Like there's a lot of discussion about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of the Bitcoin OGs and a lot of the, Bitcoiners themselves, they look at this and, that's blasphemy, is to change Bitcoin. But this is an evolution, just like any technology. I do believe if Bitcoin could actually in itself transplant Bitcoin if it gets a change. If you look at just an example of the Taproot utilization, which is where all these ordinals live, this, of course, is all the way back to April 22. And then boom, this is what we've seen. And all it is, if you look at this, whether it's up and down, yes, of course, but the trend line is up. And that is the utilization of Taproot, meaning that Bitcoin, and if Casey is right, then could we see a change in Bitcoin? That is a big, big step forward in something that has not changed since Satoshi Nakamoto put this into action. So that in itself also could have a variable on how Bitcoin is perceived, from a global standard, including a lot of nation states that hold Bitcoin as a whole. Other things I want to hit on is, of course, you have to think about is WIF. There's a lot of activity within the meme coins themselves. This is on Coinbase. You're going to see some pretty active stuff, I think, overall, which could also just bring more people into the ecosystem of digital assets. Bitcoin will usually be the first step, but the opportunities there are going to continue. I have another clip for you, too, that kind of goes into the Kraken head of strategy, who's talking about Bitcoin's potential rotation maybe into some other tokens. Listen in.
As of tomorrow, when the halving takes place, 94% of all Bitcoins that will ever exist will have been mined. And less than 1%, we'll see less than 1% inflation in the circulating supply of Bitcoin going forward. So that's a really powerful story, I think, for people, and why the halving is so important.
Thomas. But there has been money taken off the table of late. Why?
With Bitcoin, we've only seen a handful of all-time highs in the last month. It is a little bit ahead of schedule versus the other 3 halving events we've seen, but nothing crazy or out of the ordinary yet. What I like to think about when it comes to the price action is it's a momentous occasion. People come in, they see the price level, they're like, I want to participate, and you get a little bit of that momentum play. But
we've just seen a churn, a movement within it, rather than perhaps money coming into Bitcoin and then going, oh, I'm going to play in the worlds of Solana now. What do you think about that movement coming from Bitcoin, ETH into the other altcoins?
Yeah, these rotations ebb and flow, and it depends on the trend at the time. As far as other alternative currencies, whether they're tokens or other layer ones like Solana, Ethereum, a lot of that's driven by whatever application exists that people are starting to really adopt early on. And one of the interesting things, in my opinion, is that the last cycle back in 21, you had tens of billions of dollars come into the space to develop new projects and whatnot. We're talking at this point about 3 years of maturation. And so that investment cycle, we kind of have these dark horses. We don't know exactly what application is going to come out, but we're really excited about it. And some stuff that's proliferating right now would be things around like GameFi in the crypto space.
All right, so the point being is that, Bitcoin goes up. This is good for the ecosystem. I think of it, very similar if you think about NVIDIA and, the benefit that it brings to the AI ecosystem. If you look at this tweet right here, next trillion-dollar tech giants will be birthed from crypto's first 2 decades of growth. Totally agree with this. Violently volatile bull and bear cycles end when crypto has passive bid just like U.S. stocks. So Bitcoin spot ETF is the first major domino. I would agree, but it's definitely not the last. And I would compare this to a lot similar to, you know, the era of Silicon Valley and all of the really amazing companies that we saw come out of that, including some of which that have done ridiculous X's in terms of performance. So this has a lot of similarities to other tech cycles that we've seen. But I think Bitcoin overall, it is the granddaddy. It's the one that is going to bring in a lot of innovation into not only the ecosystem, but in general into digital assets. So huge deal. If you guys put some comments on them though, we'll try to get some of those. I know we have a, do we have a poll? I think we do. Yeah, let's go to the poll real quick. All right, 24 hours after halving, Bitcoin will have done nothing on the win. So pretty much saying flat, pumped. Very, very mixed. Much like much of the content today. I think, you know, from the analysis, you know, experts in the space that have been here for decades, you know, in macro, and then experts in the space for Bitcoin that have been here really the last several halvings, really taking positions on both sides. So it's definitely one to watch. Make sure and smash the like button because this is going to help others start to learn more about what's happening in Bitcoin, but also what's happening in digital assets. So hit that like button right now. It does help the algorithm. Let's get to a few questions. GameFi equals cash flow, better than trading. I would say that's the case. I mean, we've seen a lot of ups and downs in terms of volatility in a lot of these projects. So there has been some big winners here recently for sure. Free airdrops from that phone pay. Yeah, no kidding. That's crazy. You know, this is another thing I think that a lot of companies, we've done several videos on this before, they don't realize the value of what these airdrops are going to be. It's going to be huge, huge, huge. There's Mr. Tom Crown. Thanks for coming in, Tom. Today is the day. I like it. That would be a good one, 420. It will do the same as the Ethereum Dencon, which caused the market to crash days later. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but it might have some impact on it. Hong Kong UK ETF online soon. Yep, could be that. I think we still need a lot more notifications of how much is going to be coming into that market. Sol has too many issues. Avalanche will pass it. That's a good one. I think I like both these projects, but you know, all of which have had some recent interesting things, including Avalanche. We're going to do a big video on Avalanche, so be on the watch for that one. We got a lot of interesting research coming on that one right there. Epic Strategy says, unless you have time to watch all day, just bet on Bitcoin. That's an easy way to do it for sure. What do you guys think about Bonk? Bonk is, we have an internal crypto pit wager going for end of year market cap on some of the meme coins. WIF is in the lead right now. Bonk is still in the game, but it's going to have a lot to challenge WIF, I think, because WIF right now is nestling in right behind Shiba and Doge. So very interesting. Cycle started early, ends early. Maybe people are looking at that, and this would be, yeah, I would agree. This could be one of the most hated cycles if it does get out of proportion. So be on the watch. Because I think ETH is another one that everybody's been very upset with, you know, how ETH has performed in this. We pumped a little, then in my opinion, okay, we short the heck out of Bitcoin. That'll be an interesting play if you go that direction. How long until the halving takes place? So let's go back and see if we've moved up much since we started the show today. Yeah, it's already down to 5 hours, and I think that was 30 minutes ago, was 8 hours. So you can kind of see it's accelerating pretty quickly. So, it's back up to 6. So it's moving, it's bouncing right now. Bitcoin price still holding though. May not move for weeks. Sailor hasn't aged at all. Hey, listen, when you're a billionaire like that, you don't age badly at all. You don't age. I think, let's see, what else do we have here coming in? I think people that have a sense know what's going on and what's going to happen. Yeah, I like it. OMG, this is worse than Y2K. We're doomed. You were around Y2K. You actually saw that. I remember it because that was a very weird event. You know, everybody thought, you know, the binary system was going to kill us all. Chinese TikTok looks like a, that's true. I loved that, you know, that montage. I thought it was great. You know, it was fun. And if anything, it was funny. Well, at least we know that our exit liquidity looks like now. That's for sure. Let's talk about Solana and Base booming. Yeah. So remember, Coinbase wallet now having Solana integrated into that. So all those Sol tokens now available over on that. So a lot happening out there for sure. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you're watching this after and the Bitcoin halving has occurred, let's see how it goes. If it's an up or down, we definitely will play that one back, and we'll probably see you guys with a different viewpoint on Monday when we come back into studio. So as I said, hit that like button right now. Just one last time. Like this, help others find this over the weekend. If you're not following me on X, it's very simple. It's just @PaulBaron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.